Ma'am, ano po, 44 po yung nasa klase. So, mga nasa kalahati po ng klase yung
Kalahati
wala.
pa ang wala. Anyway. So, medyo ano kasi ito no, itong karuktong nung medyo mahaba-haba kaya gusto ko sana magsimula na. Pero anyway, hopefully pag natapos kong ipakita yung gawa nung tatlo na pipiliin ko doon sa makumpleto na tayo. Okay. So, ngayon ang gagawin natin nasaan yung ito, yan. So, i-apply natin yung rules of inference for propositional logic para sa argument, no? Yung argument, uulitin ko lang, papakita ko yung video ko mamaya. Para maano natin, no, ma-decompose natin using argument yung isang isang set ng statement, no. Ito yung portion na gagawin natin ngayon, no, applying yung rules of inference. Ayan. So, yung ating rules of inference, meron tayong 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, no? 10. Yung addition, simplification, conjunction, absorption, modus ponens, modus tollens, disjunctive syllogism, hypothetical syllogism, constructive dilemma, and then destructive dilemma, decomposing conjunction, and then yung huli yung decomposing and then destructive. Now, ito yung unahin natin yung nasa ilalim, no? Pakita natin yung gawa ni Ren Marie. Yan Marie. Okay. Viñalon. Nandiyan ba si Viñalon? Teka. Tingnan natin yung attendance. Viñalon. Okay, wala pa si Viñalon. Okay. Liitan natin para makikita rin yung Okay. So, dito tayo. Ito yung gawa niya. So, dun sa number 1, ito yung nakalagay sa, wait lang. Okay. I think, ito. Tama ba? O, ito. Nasa baba. Ayan, okay. So, sinabi niya dito, ang laws na nag-apply ay redundancy. Okay. Dito, laws of redundancy. Oh, okay. Laws of redundancy then. Laws of absorption law. Ito, mali raw yung equation. Okay. So, hanggang 5. Okay. So, yun yung kay balik tayo dito. Okay, next. Ito namang next ay kay Legaspi. Andiyan ba si Adrian? Jean? Balikan natin yung ating listahan dahil hindi ko nakikita. Jean Legaspi. Jean Legaspi. Wala pa siya. Okay. So, ito yung gawa niya. Jean Adrian. Okay. So, sabi niya dito, tagal ng net natin. Redundancy. So, ito redundancy. Heavy yung graphics nito. Ayan, tagal mag-load. Pagka dark, pansin nyo, yung mga magagawa ng ng application, tapos dark yung niya. Katulad nito, dark yung niya, yung background niya. Ayan. Medyo matagal yan, no? Mas maraming kinakain na memory yan sa space. Kaya kung kayo ay gagawa ng pagka the more na maliwanag, no? Ibig sabihin, yung mga nasa lighter shade, hindi ganun ka, no? Kaya, ang tagal ng niya, ng loading niya, no? Okay. Anyway, since matagal yung loading niya, hanap tayo ng medyo mabilis-bilis ng konti. Lima lang naman tong ipapakita natin. Tagal nung niya. Okay, hanap tayo ng next. So, yung una niyang answer ay redundancy. Okay. Itong kay Sam. Samantha, nandiyan ka ba? Miss Cruz. Ayos yung symbol niya, oh. Spotify. Nandiyan ba si Samantha?
Yes po, ma'am.
Tama ba? Spotify itong ginamit mo?
Po.
Okay. Ayan. Ito yung gawa niya. Okay. Salamat naman. Meron na andyan sa pa nakita ko. Okay. Start the presentation. Ang galing Ginamit niya si Spotify para ipakita yung number 1, number 2, number 3. Ano ba? Fan ka ba talaga ng Spotify, Iha? Okay. Ginawa niyang background yung Spotify. Ang gandang concept, ha? Okay. So, yung number 1, naglagay siya, distributive, negation, and identities. Ayan. Okay. Naalala mo na ba? Ayan. Pinapaano ko. Ito ay distributed negation and identities din. Ito, gumamit ng De Morgan's distributive, commutative, negation, identities, absorption. Ayan. Ito, absorption. Okay. Absorption law. Alright. And equivalency is not logical. Okay, hindi daw logical. Okay. And the last one. Bakit may great day agad? Okay. So, pinaka-last na pala yung number 5. Ayan. Okay. Okay naman, kasi 5 lang. So, nilagyan niya ng Saan niyo nakukuha to? Sa Canva? Meron bang mga ganito sa Canva? Tama? Sa Canva yun?
Sa YouTube po, ma'am. Marami pong templates doon.
Sa YouTube? Talaga? Alam ko video lang yung YouTube. So, sinaset up niya na. Maganda. Kasi diretso siya na Okay. Next, etong kay Angelo Calzar. Nandiyan ba si Calzar? Ayan, nandyan siya.
Yes po.
Okay. So, ito naman sa'yo ay diba? Andali pagka light yung shade ng ng image. So, yung mga gagawa dyan ng game, mas maganda talaga kung yung nyo, background nyo ay light. Para madaling mag-load. Para hindi naghihintay yung ito yung example ng So, kay Angelo, yung number 1, distributive identities. Distributive and identities. Tapos ito naman ang number 2, distributive and negation commutative. Ayan. Identities. Tapos yung number 3, De Morgan's distributive, identities, negation, and commutative. Itong number 4, absorption. And then number 5, naglo-load lang yung number 5. Lagay ko na yung rows of difference. 29. Itong pinost na sa Post it. Meron nga palang yung parang sponsored na seminar ang school regarding knowing your career path. Nag-sign up na ba kayo? Baka kung sa iba na hindi pa nila nalalaman kung anong plano nila sa life nila. Ayan. Merong ng career path. So this is number 5. Hindi siya logically equivalent. Ayan. Okay. So napakita na natin yung pangatlo. 29. Isa lang yung nadagdag. Sige, isa pa. And ito yung kay Irish. Tegyo. Ayan, nakita ko na yung name ni Tegyo dun sa Ito yung kay Irish. So, yung next niya ay okay. So, number 1, distributive and identities. Okay. Number 2, negation, distributive, commutative, and identities. Saan ba yung pinost ni Sir? Siguro may-ari nito. Ayan, career journey. Copy ko nga. Ilagay ko sa ito sa Facebook. And then sa number 3, ilagay ko sa posting. Enter. Ang link kaya nito? Pinost din yan ni Sir. Okay, nilagay ko sa GC. So, sa number 3, asan yung sagot mo sa number 3? Asan si si Tehio? Irish, andyan ka. Wala yung mo dito. Kung ano yung rules na nag-apply. Asan si Tehio? Hindi siya lumitaw. Okay. Truth table pala yun. So, pinihiwalay mo. Hindi kasya. Okay. So, ito yung truth table. Akala ko hindi lang nakalagay doon. Sorry. So, ang nag-apply na rule ay distributive law, identities. Kaya pala hindi siya nagre-react. Okay. De Morgans and negation at commutative. Okay. Right. Ilagay ko na yun. Ilagay ko rin dito. Okay. So, dito sa number 4, ang in-apply niya ay absorption law. Ayan. So, isa lang yung niya, in-apply niya dito. And the last one, number 5. Tagal mag-load Ano pa yung akin? Teka, magbawas nga tayo ng mga nakaload. Aking natang ano yung nakaload pa. Bawasan ko to. Okay. Para bumilis-bilis. Hindi na yung nakaload. Off naman yung aking iPad. Ayun. Wala. Nag-ano na siya. 1, 2, 3. Ayan. Okay, so yung panghuli niya, they are not logically equivalent. Okay. So, 33. Ayan, pwede na yung 33 na numbers na yan. Okay, so yun yung ano, no? So, itutuloy lang natin ito since na pag-usapan na natin yung mga rules last time. Anyway, papasadahan ko pa ulit yan. Pero bago natin simulan yung ano, ito yung kailangan nating panoorin. Yes. Oh. I'm not sure about whoever is next to it. Because she said there's a chicken. I don't remember the chicken. Those two are all dry goods. The one next to each other are both dry goods. Not that. Not the chicken. You have to go a little bit inside. Yes. Yeah. You will see, they are all dry goods. Okay. Yeah. I have no idea. I haven't, really weighed it. I have no idea. I'm sorry. Okay. Alright. Okay, bye. Alright, so, eto yung ano, no? I-share ko lang. Yung Zoom meeting nung baka meron sa inyo ay gusto pang malaman ang kanilang direksyon, no? Yung kanilang journey. Na andyan yung ating ang ating sponsor ay sina Doc Muhi, and then ito yung ating mga speaker, si Miss Elaine Cruz Ledesma, no? Magandang no, kung type nyo, no? Ito yung meeting code dun sa Zoom. Ayan, may passcode tayo, alum, no? Yung mga nag-iisip-isip pa dyan kung anong plano nila sa life nila, no? Makakatulong yan sa inyo. Okay, and then ito yung ating rules of inference. Watch muna tayo. So, right now, yung ating attendance ay nasa...
Our purpose is to create an argument, or actually a valid... In this video, we are going to take a look at rules of inference for propositional logic.
Wala yung isa.
So before we start talking about the different rules of inference, first let's talk about what our purpose is. Our purpose is to create an argument, or actually a valid argument, where logic will hold. So an argument is just a sequence of propositions. Propositions like P1, P2, etc. such that if P1 and P2 and P3 and all the way up to Pn, whatever that happens to be, implies, or if then, Q. So we call P1, P2, etc. the premises, and we call Q the conclusion. And if it's a valid argument, A valid argument would mean that the premises imply, the conclusion. Essentially, we're saying if this is a tautology, it is a valid argument. So if it is always true, then it is a valid argument. So let's take a look at our statement. If it is raining, I will need an umbrella. Then we say, it is raining. And let's talk about how we might write this using propositions. So let's let it is raining be represented by P. Therefore, this is P. And let's let I will need an umbrella be represented by Q. And here we have an if-then statement, even though...
Okay. Hindi pala ako nakashare. Sorry. Ulitin ko lang. Hindi nakikita ng estudyante ko. Bakit wala nagre-react sa inyo? Kakaliwa, timing na timing kayo dyan, ha? Okay. Right. Check. Tinan ko yung ano. Parang naputol ako kanina. Ano to? Okay. Lagyan natin dito para nakikita ko kung may nagko-comment. Okay. Nakikita nyo na ba yung screen? Kanina nawala. Naputol ako kanina. Napansin nyo? Class?
Opo ma'am, naglag ka po. Pero kita na po ngayon yung screen.
O kanina may napapanood kasi biglang naputol, ano? Okay. Check natin yung audio.
In this video, we are going to take a
Okay na? Naririnig na uli?
Opo ma'am, audible po.
Okay, good. Alright,
look
ulitin
at rules of inference for propositional logic. So before we start talking about the different rules of inference, first let's talk about what our purpose is. Our purpose is to create an argument, or actually a valid argument, where logic will hold. So an argument is just a sequence of propositions. Propositions like P1, P2, etc. such that if P1 and P2 and P3 and all the way up to Pn, whatever that happens to be, implies, or if then, Q. So we call P1, P2, etc. the premises, and we call Q the conclusion. And if it's a valid argument would mean that the premises imply, the conclusion. Essentially, we're saying if this is a tautology, it is a valid argument. So if it is always true, then it is a valid argument. So let's take a look at our statement. If it is raining, I will need an umbrella. Then we say, it is raining. And let's talk about how we might write this using propositions. So let's let it is raining be represented by P. Therefore, this is P. And let's let I will need an umbrella be represented by Q. And here we have an if-then statement, even though I didn't write the N. So let's talk about how we would write this. My first statement says, if P, then Q. My second statement says, it is raining, so that's P. So we know in our first statement, if P then Q would mean that if P is true, therefore Q is true. And then I tell you in the second line that P is true. Therefore, what is my conclusion? And again, remember the three dots mean therefore. So therefore, we can say Q is true. I will need an umbrella. Over the next several slides, we're going to take a look at some different rules of inference that we're going to be using, and I'm just going to introduce a lot of them to you and hopefully help them make sense to you so that when we use them, you're just ready to go. So we're just sort of building that toolkit for down the road. The first rule of inference is modus ponens, and this should look familiar because we just did an example with the rain and the umbrella on the last slide. So modus ponens says this: if we have if P then Q, and then I tell you P is true, the result is Q. And again, this means therefore. So those three dots mean therefore. Now again, this is exactly what we just did. If it rains, then I'll need my umbrella. It rained, therefore I need my umbrella. Great, so how am I going to write this in another way? Because on each of these we're going to look at how to write them as a tautology. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to say if this is true, then that's my conclusion. So how would I write all of that stuff on the top? I would say if P then Q and P. So I'm saying if this is true, then Q is true. So that's how I would write it as a tautology. Now let's take a look at modus tollens. Very similar. The first statement is the same. The second statement is not Q. And the result or conclusion is not P. So again, here are the premises. And then of course our conclusion. And then a lot of people struggle with this one, just kind of making it make sense in their head. But what I would encourage you to do is think about if P then Q, and know that I can write if P then Q as an equivalent statement as if not Q then not P. And to me that makes a lot more sense, because if not Q then not P looks exactly like modus ponens. We're saying if something then something else, then the first thing is true, then the second thing is the result. And that's exactly what modus tollens tells us. Now how would I write it as a tautology? I would write, just as I did before, the premises as the if part of the implication. So if P and Q, if P then Q and not Q, if all of that, then not P. Let's take a look at a few more rules of inference. The first is the hypothetical syllogism. And this should look pretty familiar to you because this is very similar to the transitive property. The transitive property says if A implies B and B implies C, then A implies C. And that's exactly what this is saying. It's saying if P implies Q, so if it rains, then I'll need an umbrella. And then if Q implies something else, so if I need an umbrella, then maybe I should wear galoshes. Then the conclusion is if P, then R, or if it rains, then I should wear galoshes. So that's all it's telling us, is that one implication essentially leads to another. So how would I write that as a tautology? Again, I'm writing my premises as if P then Q and if Q then R. And then I'm saying if that's true, then the result is if P then R. Hypothetical syllogism. Then we have the disjunctive syllogism, again because this is a disjunction. And we're saying P or Q, and then not P. So we're saying P or Q occurred, but it wasn't P, therefore it was Q. So again, this one makes a heck of a lot of sense to me, because if we're saying that P or Q must have occurred, but P didn't occur, it makes sense Q must have occurred. So how would I write that then? I would say P or Q and not P implies Q. The next two rules of inference are kind of silly, actually, but again, we will use these quite often, but the logic is very easy to follow on these. The first one is addition, and the rule for addition says P. So P is true, is what this is saying. That's the premise, is that P is true. The conclusion is that P or Q is true. Well, now this should make sense. We know that when we're dealing with this disjunction, with this or statement, that tells us that one or the other must be true, or both. And therefore, it makes perfect sense that if P, then P or Q, which is how I would write that as a corresponding tautology. So if P, then P or Q is true, which makes perfect sense. Simplification is the same thing, but kind of backwards. And notice here, we're dealing with a conjunction, we're dealing with and. So the premise is that P and Q is true. So let's remember that this tells us that both P and Q are true. So the conclusion that tells us that Q is true is sort of a duh. And again, I could have, instead of using Q, I could use P instead, and it's the exact same rule. So again, how would I write that as a tautology? P and Q. So if P and Q, then P. Or if P and Q, then Q. Both of those would be the same. Let's take a look at our last two rules, the conjunction and the resolution. Now the conjunction is super straightforward and kind of silly, but really it's just a reminder. Conjunction, which is of course what this is, says the premises are that P is true and Q is true. And because P is Q and Q is true, then P and Q is also true. Which, again, we kind of already knew, but that's okay. P and Q. So if those are both true, then P and Q, the conjunction, is true. So pretty straightforward and kind of silly, but it gives us a name to use when we're working with proofs. And then of course the resolution. Now this one's probably the hardest one to get your mind around. Resolution is saying that not P or R is true, and P or Q is true. And if that's the case, then either Q or R is true, or both. So let's think of it this way. Let's pretend not P is true. So if not P is true, then P is false. Now for both of these statements to be true, which is what the premise says, that would mean Q would have to be true, and R could be true or false, and we don't really care. But because Q is true, that would make this conclusion true, because Q is true. So let's now take a look at if I changed things up and I said P was true, so not P was false. So if not P is false, that means R would have to be true for this to be true. And then if R is true, we don't really care if Q is true, because down here I've got a true. And therefore, no matter what, again, using these premises and the conclusion, we can see that resolution is a valid way of thinking. So how would I write that as a tautology? I would say not P or R, and P or Q. So if that, then Q or R. So let's take a look at why we're learning about these. What are these rules of inference for? And they are so that we can build a valid argument. And a valid argument says that we're going to be given some information. We're going to be given the premise, and it might be more than one premise. And we need to use those laws to show that some conclusion is true based on the premise and based on the laws. So before we look at this one specifically, let's look at just the general. The general case, we'll start with some reason here, and anything that goes here is going to be a true statement. And then anything that goes here is going to be a reason. So it's going to be like a two-column proof. And this, typically, the first one is a premise, and then from then on, these are going to be your rules of inference that we just learned. And so I'm going to continue with steps and steps and steps until I get to whatever my final step is. And my final step is going to be my conclusion statement. And the reason, again, will be some rule of inference. And that's how we're going to build a valid argument, is we're going to say, okay, this is true because they told me it was true. And then all of these other things are true because of the rules of inference. And therefore, this last thing is true, and that's what I wanted to prove was true. So let's put that into action then. If I were doing this particular question, I would first write P and if P then Q, because I always started out with a premise, because how else am I going to start? I'm going to start with something that I know is true. So again, P and if P then Q is true because they told me it was true. From there, I'm going to look at my rules of inference and think about the fact that I'm trying to get to the fact that Q is true. Well, based on my premise, I can say that P is true. And how can I say that P is true? We have a rule, or a rule of inference, called simplification. And that simplification rule says that if you have if P then Q is, if P and Q, then P. And it also says if P and Q, then Q. Basically saying if you've got P and Q are true, then P is true, and P and Q are true, then Q is true. So I can say simplification on 1. So I'm saying here's my first statement, I'm simplifying that to say P is true, and I'm going to simplify that to say if P then Q is true. So same reason, simplification on 1. Now, that seems silly because I didn't really do anything. I just said 2 separate statements, but that's exactly what this whole process is about. I'm saying, hey, guess what? This is true because I can simplify my first statement. This is true because I can simplify my first statement. My final conclusion is that therefore Q is true. And you might be saying, hold up, you didn't really do anything. How did you show that Q is true? Well, we have a rule called modus ponens. And if you'll recall, and I'm going to say on 2 and 3 before I forget, and if you'll recall, modus ponens tells us that if we have if P then Q and P, therefore Q. And that's exactly what I have here. I have if P then Q and I have P, and therefore Q is true. So this is how a valid argument works. I started with a premise that I knew was true because they told me it was. I used my rules of inference, and I got down to my conclusion. So,
okay, so yun ang gusto kong mag-arrive tayo, no? We come up using the rules of inference as well as yung una nating laws na diniscuss to come up with the valid argument, no? Okay. So, simulan natin. Wow, 41 na. Buti naman. Buti naman. Madami na kayo. Alright. Okay. So, para mag-come up tayo, ito yung aking objective, no? Na masagutan natin itong exercise 3 naman, no? So, 5 ulit yan. Ayan. So, we need to arrive in this composition. Ito, no? Yung ating titingnan natin yung i-present na argument, which is Itong tatlo na to, no? And then, meron tayong computation, no? Inisa-isa natin yung bawat isa hanggang umabot tayo sa H, no? Na eto na yung tautology. Kumbaga, yung always true. Hindi na, yung pinakadulo na, no? Ayan. So, paano tayo mag-a-arrive dyan? We have to, kung pinakinggan nyo yun, papasadahan ko lang ulit yung rules of inference. Eto, no? So, meron tayo dyang addition. Okay. Bilisan na natin, no? So, dito sa addition, paano ko ba ito ano, na picture? Para nakadikit doon sa ating, ano. Iles muna natin. Ayan. Okay. Screen. Maganda sa ano. Okay. Delete. And then ilagay natin dito. Okay, ilagyan natin ito. Kasi medyo masakit yung lalamunan ko, class. So, okay, magpapatulong, no? And addition. Okay. Ayan natin ng konti. Ayan. Ayan yung ating ano. Okay. So, ito na. Isa-isahin natin yung rules of inference. Okay. Dito pala. So, let's start with addition. Pakibasa nga yung addition. Charwin. Okay.
Addition.
Okay.
P, therefore, PVQ.
Hindi, ito. Yung ano.
Okay po.
Ah.
Addition. The inference is also called as disjunction introduction. It is similarly related to disjunction sigillism. This inference means that if P or the premise is true, then P or Q, or the conclusion is also true. Addition builds up to or statement.
Okay. So, tingnan lang natin yung or na statement dito, no? So, pag wala kayong nakikita na any symbol katulad nito dun sa ating premise, it must be true, no? Kasi kung may nakalagay dyan sa tabi niyan, katulad ng yung ating negation, then that is false, no? So, in this case, this is true. Oh? Ayan. And then, therefore, P or Q are true, no? So, pareho silang true. Ayan. So, dahil ang linis lang naman, ano? Walang problema. Kasi kitang-kita mo naman, no? Wala ka na ikitang negation na rule. Okay. Next. Ganun lang siya kasimple. Okay. Simplification. Yung next na item. Okay? Basahin mo nga. Carlos. Dominis.
Rinig ko ba mo?
Yes.
Simplification.
Ito sa taas.
This inference is also called as conjunction elimination. It is some Implication means that in an instant when Q appears on a line of proof, it can result to either of P and Q. It is useful for breaking down or turning long statements into a shorter statement at the beginning of a proof.
Okay. So, ginagamit si simplification, salamat Carlos, para i-break down, no? Kung medyo malaki, ano yung statement, which is, so meron tayong dalawang statement dito, P, therefore P and Q, no? P and Q is, no? It's true. So, dalawang statement siya. So, ginawa niya, break down niya pagdating sa simplification, no? So, yung ating statement dito, P and Q, therefore P is true, no? Kita nyo na, wala nakalagay. Or, P and Q, therefore Q is true, no? So, sinimplify niya lang. Kumbaga, break down niya lang yung ibig sabihin nung nakalagay dito sa atin sa addition, no? Ayan. Okay. Ito. Okay. Okay. So, that is simplification. Next. Next is conjunction. Pabasa po yung conjunction. Zarina Olako.
Can you hear me po, ma'am?
Yes.
Conjunction. If the statement P is true and statement Q is true, then we can conclude that the logical conjunction of the two statements P and Q is true. It is useful for building up end statements at the end of a proof.
Okay. So, ito ay end, no? Kasi, pinagsama niya lang, no? Kasi totoo naman na true pareho yun eh. Yan, no? Yung ating example dito, yung ating premise at conclusion. Pansin nyo naman, wala naman nakatabing symbol. So, ibig sabihin, pareho itong Q. So, since sila ay parehong di pinagsama na lang sila, no? Kinonjunct sila. Because they are both true, no? So, dahil both true, alam nyo naman yung rules ng and at saka or, no? So, it has to be both true. And they are both true, so gumamit tayo ng and, no? Therefore, P and Q are true. Ayan. So, yun yung conjunction. Next. Absorption. Tama ba? Absorption na tayo. Binibilisan ko kasi gusto kong magawa natin yung ating Okay, absorption. Next. Tawagin natin si Aldrich. Aldrich.
Hello po, ma'am.
Yes. Itong definition sa taas.
Yes po. This rule of inference is an identity linking a pair of binary operations. Suppose P implies Q. We can conclude that Q is absorbed by P.
See, simple lang, di ba? So, ito yung ating premise sa taas, no? Yung statement sa taas. P implies Q. Therefore, P implies, nakalagay sa enclosed in parentheses, P and Q, no? So, tama naman siya. Again, pag ginamit natin yung and, both has to be true. Nakita nyo naman parehong true si Q. So, in-imply niya, using yung ating symbol ng imply dun sa loob, na both P and Q are true. No? Therefore, P implies that P and Q are true. Okay, so yan yung absorption. Okay, next is modus ponens. Ito yung example dun sa video, no? Alright, modus ponens. Si modus ponens, pakibasa, Adrian. May audio ka ba, Adrian? Bernardo?
Hello po. Rinig po ba?
Yes, rinig.
The first premise is the conditional claim P implies Q, also known as the if-then statement, which we know is true. The second premise is that P is also true. With these two premises, we can conclude that Q must be true as well. It can be summarized as P implies Q and P is asserted to be true. Therefore, Q must be true.
Therefore, Q must be true. No? Okay, dun sa modus ponens, gumapit siya ng implied, no? Na rule dito, no? P implies Q, no? If then, no? if P implies Q, if then, no? If or then, no? So, gamitin natin yung if P implies Q, then P is true, therefore Q is true. Ayan. So, ganun lang yun, no? So, tingnan lang natin, no? Kailangan malino yung mata natin dun sa mga symbol na ginagamit, no? So, ano lang ito, no? Yung premise, ang nasa condition, kung ang kiniklaim niya, no? Kiniklaim niya si P, no? Si premise ay true, then Q must be true, no? So, magkadikit sila. Okay. So, pag nilagyan po ng negative dito, pag nilagyan mo ng halimbawang negation dito, hindi na to modus ponens, ha? So, para inaano ko lang, ginugulo ko lang yung utak nyo, no? So, pag sinabing halimbawang negative P implies Q, therefore, dapat negative Q rin lang yun, no? Yun lang yung panggulo lang, pero actually, ini-explain niya lang na pag true si P, no, ini-imply na si Q rin ay true, no? So, kung ito ay may nakalagay na negative dito, then negative Q rin dito sa kabila, no? So, since ito yung ating example, no? Okay. P implies Q. Oh. So, wala kayo nakitang symbol, therefore P is true, and P is true, and therefore Q is true. Ginawa ng babaeng yun doon. Okay. So, yun yung ating modus ponens, no? The premise claims, no, that meron tayong conditional na claim na P implies Q, no? Nagsimula na siya doon sa premise na true siya, no? Ayan. Okay. Next, modus tollens. Modus tollens, Roosevelt, season. Pakibasa. Ito.
Ma'am, read po, ma'am.
Yes. Ang ginawa mo doon sa taas.
Modus tollens. It has two premises. The first premise is a conditional claim, an if-then statement, which we know is true. The second premise is that it is not the case that Q. With these two premises, we can conclude that it is not case that P. In simplest terms, it states that if a statement is true and another statement is false, the conclusion must be false. If so, it is contrapositive.
Contrapositive, no? Kumbaga ito yung baliktad ni tollens. Ang pangalan nun, ponens, no? So ilagay natin sa taas, no, para makita natin yung ni modus tollens, no? Baba pa natin. Okay. So dito kay tollens, modus tollens, siya ay isang contrapositive. So ano ibig sabihin nun, no? Nakalagay naman dito sa taas, dun sa ating pinakaunang statement na si premise at saka si Q ay parehong true, no? So anong ginawa niya? So binaliktad niya, no? So contrapositive, no? So dito sa ating susunod na statement, syempre inuna niya na ang direction niya ay si Q yung nauna dito, no? So therefore, sa tollens, false si conclusion, which is yung Q. Therefore, kung false yung conclusion, therefore false din yung premise, no? So yun yung niya, no? Yan yung ang tatandaan lang natin sa kay modus tollens, medyo binabaliktad niya yung ginawa dito kay modus ponens. Ayan. Para hindi na tayo malito, no? Simpleng simpleng explanation dun sa dalawa. Ayan, para kung halimbawang gagamitin natin yan, okay, makikita natin na yung pagkakaiba ng dalawa, no? Okay, next, disjunctive syllogism. Eloisa Givani.
disjunctive syllogism. This inference means that at least one of the two statements is true. If we know that the former is not true, we can conclude that it has to be the latter that is true. So in symbols, if P is true or Q is true and P is false, then Q is true. Disjunctive syllogism breaks down OR statements.
Okay. So, dito sa ating disjunctive syllogism, bini-breakdown niya yung ating OR, no? Yung ating OR statement. So, meron tayo dyang OR na statement, which is P or Q, no? P or Q. Now, una muna ang ginawa niya, alam niya naman ang rules ng OR, diba? So, ang OR, either, no? Either may true or may false, no? So, dun siya nag-start sa false, no? Which is yung P. So, ang sinasabi niya lang dito, dun sa distinctive syllogism, yung ating rules ng OR, no? May false, may true. So, inuna niya na yung negation, ninegate niya na yung P, therefore Q is true, no? Ayun. So, ganun yung tatandaan lang natin. Dun sa OR na statement, no? Pag may ginamit na OR, no? Kung disjunctive syllogism, mauuna yung negative. Uunahin niya muna dahil it's either false, true, or false. So, para mauna na yung false, inuna niya yung P, no? And then, therefore, Q is true. Okay? So, yan yung ano. So, pwede rin naman niya na baliktad, no? Pwedeng inilagay niya, inuna niya si P na true. Pero pagdating dito sa, dito sa Q, siya ay false. Disjunctive syllogism pa rin yun. Nangyari lang dito sa ating statement. Yan yung nauna. Okay. So, next. So, yun lang. Tatandaan lang natin yung rules ng OR. There are either true or false statements. So, ito, hinati nila. No? Okay. Brinake nila yung OR. Yung rules ng OR. Okay. Next is hypothetical. Hypothetical syllogism. Ayaw mo maano ha. Okay. Sige. Tawagin natin si Gian Franco. Okay ba yung audio mo, Gian Franco? Agabaw? Okay. Parang may comment ata siya dito. Okay. Mukhang wala siyang audio. Tama ba? No mic daw. Okay. Sige. So, tawagin naman natin si teka, dapat pala binalik ko muna dito. Okay. Jimwell Desipolo.
Rinig po ba?
Okay, sige.
Hypothetical syllogism, also called as chain reasoning or chain deduction, is a valid rule of interference wherein if we know that P leads to Q and that Q leads to R, then we can conclude that P leads to R.
Okay. So, dito sa ating salamat, Jimuel, yung ating hypothetical syllogism, meron tayong tinatawag na chain reasoning, no? Yung chain reasoning at saka chain deduction, parang ano yan, parang dahil. Yung may mga dahil tayo. Dahil si P implies Q, therefore, okay, therefore, si Q implies, mali pala. Oh my God. Naririnig niyo pa ba ako? Naririnig niyo ako, class?
Yes.
Ay,
yes po, ma'am.
Ayun. Bigla akong nawalan ng power. O, diba? Buti na lang may power bank akong malaki.
Yes po, ma'am, rinig po.
Ay, salamat. Yung aking mga... Biglang namatay yung ilaw. Biglang namatay lahat. Buti na lang nakabaterya yung laptop ko. Fully loaded. Okay. Okay, so ito yung ating, balik tayo. Tama na muna yung sobrang excitement. Kailangan na eh. Ako, mukhang mawawala na naman ako ng kuryente nito. Nakakais talaga tong Meralco. Sana maayos na talaga yung power natin. Okay, so again, yung hypothetical syllogism, meron siyang chain reasoning, no? Si P implies Q. Q implies R, no? Yung mga dahil kasi ganito, no? Ayan. So, dahil si Q, okay, no? Ay in-imply niya si R, no? Therefore, ang pinakadulo mo, therefore P implies R. Ayun. So, kumbaga nagli-lead siya, no? Nili-lead niya, no? Yun yung mga pagka nagdadahilan tayo, no? Yung Meralco kasi, ayan. Ayan tuloy, wala akong kuryente. Ayan tuloy, naputol yung aking ganon, no? Yun sunod-sunod, no? Sunod-sunod na magkakadikit sila, no? Pero ang sinasabi ko lang naman ay walang kuryente. Naputol ang kuryente, pero marami akong sinabi, no? Parang ganon. Yan yung hypothetical syllogism, no? Marami kang sinabi, isa lang naman yung gusto mong paratingin, no? Okay. So, that is hypothetical syllogism. Next, naging example tuloy yung ating kuryente. Ayan, next is yung constructive dilemma, no? Basahin mo nga. Meron pa ba akong hindi natatawag sa taas? Denise, Alemania. Ayan, si Germany, tawagin natin. Ayan. Kasi yung apelyido niya, Alemania, Tagalog yan ng Germany. Ayan. Si Miss Germany.
Po ba?
Okay. Yeah, rinig, sige.
Constructive dilemma.
Dilemma.
Suppose we know that P leads to Q and that R leads to S and that either P or R is true. Then we can arrive at the conclusion that either Q or S has to be true.
It has to be true, no? So binigyan tayo ng problema, no? Yung dilemma, no? Constructive naman, no? So paano siya naging constructive, no? Medyo leading siya, no? So ganito kasi pagka tayo, no? Nagpapaliwanag tayo halimbawa, no? Kailangan meron tayong problema na kailangan lusutan, no? So i-construct mo ngayon, no? Yung iyong dahilan, no? So gumamit ka dito ng or at saka and, no? So doon sa taas, pareho, nakita niyo yung end na symbol dito sa ating no? Parehong end na symbol, 'di ba? Dito sa taas, and then dito puro or, no? Now, sinasabi dito sa dalawang na to, no? Parehong puro true lahat, no? So, P leads to Q and gumamit tayo ng and, R leads to S. Ayan. So, ito yung ating dahilan, no? Dun sa natin, sa ating dilemma. Okay. So, ano ibig sabihin nun, no? Wala man tayong no? Dito wala man tayong nega, no? Wala tayong negation, no? So, since nakita niyo naman, wala naman tayong symbol ng negation dito sa taas. So, ibig sabihin, lahat naman ito ay parehong true, no? So, tama naman, nakalagay dito. Okay? So, kinonstruct niya, dinikit niya si P kay R, no? P or R, they are both true, no? Therefore, Q or S are both true, no? Okay, so nakita nyo, wala namang no? Wala namang nega, no? So pareho lang naman sila. So parehong true. Ayan. Okay, so yun yung ating constructive dilemma. Okay. Now, punta naman tayo sa destructive dilemma. Okay. Ayan, malapit na tayong mag-decompose ng ating argument. Ayan, yan yung pinakagusto kong matapos magkaroon tayo ng decomposition ng ating argument. Now, yung example dito sa baba ay conjunction, no? So, dito tayo sa destructive. Tas natin. Ayan. Okay. Tapos, i-ready natin yung ating mga truth table. Okay. So, destructive dilemma. Hindi na may constructive. Ito naman, destructive. Tawagin natin si Jamie. Jamie. Ayan. Okay. Medyo mahina, kuya.
Hello po.
Ate, pala. Sorry.
Ayan po. This inference is related to constructive dilemma. It states that if P leads to Q and R leads to S, and either Q is false or S is false, then we can conclude that either P is false or R is false.
Yun. Okay. So, yan yung ating ano, no? Ito yung kabaliktaran ng ating constructive, no? So, ano lang natin si ano, no? Para nakadikit. Ayan. So, kung dito sa constructive, ang ating point of reference ay yung ating end, end pa rin dito sa destructive. Kaya lang sa destructive, binaliktad niya, no? So, ninegate niya ngayon. Gumamit siya ng negation. So, ito yung kabaliktaran ni constructive dilemma. Now, so, nakalagay dito, no? Doon sa ating unang statement, puro lahat sila true, no? P implies Q and R implies S, no? So, doon sa destructive, binaliktad niya, no? So, nagginawa niya, ninegate niya. Ninegate niya si Q, no? Si Q is false or S is false. Ayan. Therefore, P, itong si P, okay, P is false or R is false, no? So, yun lang yung ating tatandaan dun sa dalawa. Ayan. So, okay. So, magde-decompose na tayo. Okay. Dito sa ating decomposition. Okay. Ang ginamit na example ay conjunction. Okay. So, okay. Dito tayo, ito yung mag-a-arrive tayo sa tautology, no? Tautology ng ating tapos gagamitin natin yung ating rules, no? Rules ng inference as well as yung iba dito, nung pangalan nito, yung ating pangalan nila, propositional equivalence, no? Kasama yan, no? Kasama yan na gagamitin, no? Para dito sa ating kailangan mag-arrive tayo dun sa argument na valid, no? Ibig sabihin, pag argument ay valid, tautology, no? Always true. Ayan. So, dito, ang ginamit na example ay conjunction. So, si conjunction ay pang ilan ba si conjunction? Hindi. Dito na lang ang gamitin natin, no? Para nakikita natin. Si conjunction ay liitan ko ito. Ayan. Ayan. Okay. Dito ko ilalagay sa kabila para nakabangga. Liitan mo to. Bakit ay lumiit? Hindi. Ito. Yan. Okay. And then, ito, liitan para labas ka. Okay. Ayan. Dito sa kabila. Conjunction. Ayan, conjunction. Kailangan makita nyo to ng buo kasi sunod-sunod natin gagamitin siya. Although, hindi ko alam kung magagamit natin lahat. Doon sa example kasi ay, eto, nandito lang. Ayan. Destructive. Yung destructive. Ayan, okay. Okay, so, dito tayo sa ating premise. So, ang ginamit dito ay conjunction. Ito si conjunction, no? P, therefore ito pala. P and Q are true, therefore P and Q are true. Ayan. So, ito yung ating ginamit dito, no? So, ito yung, una muna, meron tayo ditong 1, 2, 3. statements. Now, sasabihin natin kung ito ba ay, no, itong tatlo na to ay tautology, no? Ibig sabihin, always true, no? Valid yung argument, no? So, yung sa exercise natin doon sa susunod, no, titingnan natin kung valid yung argument. Now, una muna, mag-start tayo. Ito na yung solution sa baba, no? Okay. So, inilagay niya lang yung premise. Nakikita nyo ba? Nakikita nyo ba? Class, kita ba? Kita?
Ako kita po.
Okay, teka. Wait lang. Kasi meron pa pala akong kulang, which is yung De Morgan. So, ilalagay ko pa doon sa ilalim. Teka ha, kukunin ko lang. Okay, yung ating para nakikita natin yung statement. Okay, so ito ay paliliitin ko. Dali lang ha, mag-print screen lang ako. Print screen. Tapos, meron pa pala akong hindi na ilagay. Teka. Undo. Okay. Okay, meron pang isang kulang doon. Ayan. Screen. Okay. Ibaba mo na nga lang. Okay. Okay. Ilagay ko siya sa baba. Okay, para okay. Tanggalin natin ito para hindi tayo nalilito. Delete. Delete. So, rules of inference yung sa taas, ito sa baba ay yung equivalence. Okay. So, pwede na natin gamitin ito. Ayan. And then, balik tayo dito. Okay. Nasa na yung ating example? Ayan. Okay. Now, ilagay ko dito. Okay. So, eto na tayo, no? Hindi ko alam kung medyo, medyo, ayan. Ano kaya maganda kung ko na lang ito dito. Okay. Ayan. And then, ito, ilagay ko dito. Tapos, sandali. Lagay ko na dun sa kabila para pareho silang nakikita. Tapos, pwede kong lakihan. Iitang ko to. Undo. Ano nangyari? Anong ginawa mo? Anong ginawa mo? Anong ginawa mo? Undo, undo, undo. Ayun, buti na lang. Ayan. Okay. At least kita siya. Okay. And then, iurong na lang natin. Okay. Pwede pang ito. Teka, sandali isa pa. Pwede nang itong iurong Yun. Okay. Sige. Ayan. O, diba? Kita na lahat. Okay. Para kang ano eh. Parang si spider lang eh. Right. So, balik tayo dun sa ating pinag-uusapan. Ano? Dito sa ating example, no, kailangan mag-arrive tayo dun sa pinaka-truth, no? Which is yung tautology. Ito yung ating mga arguments. No? Kailangan maging valid. So, pag sinabi nating valid, that is true. Right. Okay, so nag-start tayo, letter A. Ito yung ating ipoproof yung ang validity, yung tatlo, no? Negation na Q lead to R or implies R. R or P or ba to? De. R and P are true, no? Negation doon sa loob, Q, okay, meron tayong and, negation R, tapos, i-disregard nyo na lang itong symbol na to, therefore, R. Ayan. So, ito yung ating titingnan kung valid siya na argument. Let's start with A. So, yung unang premise, given siya, no, nilagay mo lang yung, ano, yung negation Q implies R, no? So, yun yung pinaka-premise. Now, dito sa letter B, meron lang tayong konting problema. Siguro maganda gawin ko na lang to dito, no? Kasi naalala ko nga pala, dito na lang sa ano, no? Walang symbol. Walang symbol eh. Nilagay mo lang yung premise, nilagay mo ng R dito. Ayan, okay. Alright. Teka lang ha, ito-check ko lang. Check ko lang tong ating example. Ano ba naman yung example na yan? Nakakaloka. Okay. Nag-print screen ako. Dito na lang natin gawin sa ano, no? Kasi nakakalito siya. Lalo tayong nalito dahil ayan. Okay. So, gagamitin ko tong example na to dito sa taas. Okay. Nakakaloka ang gumawa nito. Nagkaroon ng problema sa saan? Sa pagsusulat. Okay. Alisin na natin ito. Ibaba mo na lang yan. Ayan. Okay. Ayan. Okay. Pwede itong lakihan. Ayan. Okay. So, dito kasi may edit ko eh. Pagka ano, may nalokang nagawa nito na ano, medyo hindi niya inayos, no? So, given, so dapat nilagay niya lang, no? So, eto, yan yung sinasabi ko na dapat wala. Ayan. Okay, delete. Okay, so given na premise, inilagay, no? Tapos, yung ating letter C, given na premise number 3, so dapat nilagay din lang, okay? Okay, dapat meron nito. Ito pa lang, alam mo nang invalid ito eh. Itong panghuli, no? Kasi wala naman tong ano. Tanggalin mo na muna to, no? Okay. Ayan. So tama na siya, no? Doon sa given premise natin. Okay. Ayan. Right. So, dito, gumamit siya ng simplifications from B, no? Si B, eto, no? So, sinimplify niya, no? Alam niyo naman yung simplification sa taas, no? Gumamit siya ng or, at saka yung and, dalawa, pinagsama niya, no? Pareho lang na positive yun, no? So, ito yung ginamit niya dito, sinimplify niya, ayan, yung R. So, anong nangyari? Okay, dapat wala ito dahil wala namang negation dito, dahil sa simplification, wala tayong negation, no? So, ayan. Okay, so, ayan. So, ang hirap pagka yung nagawa ng example ay naloloka doon sa kanyang ano, no? Sa kanyang pinaggagawa, no? Okay. So, ito dapat yan, ano? So, from B, ito yung ating B, therefore, no? Sinimplify nyo, ito yung simplification, no? Okay. Therefore, P is Q. Anong binubot-bot mo dyan, ha? Anong binubot-bot mo dyan? Sira mo na naman yan. Okay. Yung aking magaling na aso ay ano, no? Therefore, yung ating R, no? R is ano, no? Sinimplify mo. Nakita niya naman dun sa ating it could be P or, ano ba yung ginamit niya? R or P. So, since R yung nauna, so R yung true, no? Di ba kayo nalilito? Maliwanag naman. Gusto niya simbolan ko uli? Kasi yung ating example medyo nakakalito kaya kinokorek ko no? Ayan. Na-gets ba, class? Magtanong kayo ha, pag hindi nyo naintindihan, no? Kasi medyo marami yung ating example dito. Ayan, yung ating gagawin na na exercise, which is eto, no? Ayan. Okay. Ayan. Okay? Pero unahin muna natin to, no? Okay. So, nandito na tayo, in-apply yung sa B, sabi dito, sinimplify niya yung B. So, ang ginawa niya, simplification. So, anong rule na nilagay niya, no? So, ito yung simplification. P or Q, no? Pareho silang true. P and Q pala, sorry, no? Parehong true. Or P and Q, no? Therefore, P. Therefore, Q. Ayan. So, dito, ang ginamit niya ay yung nauna, which is yung R, no? Ito R, no? Doon sa letter B, no? R. Okay. Next. Doon sa letter E, De Morgans. De Morgans yung ginamit niya from C. Okay, si C, De Morgans niya. No? Saan si De Morgan? Ito si De Morgan sa
Ma'am, 9 a.m. na po.
Ay, may nagpaalala. Pwede tapusin ko lang hanggang letter H, no? Bibilisan ko na. Ay, nako. Okay, so si De Morgan ang ginamit niya. Yan, nakita niyo sa taas si De Morgan. Then sa letter C, no? Okay. So, ang is ito. Okay. So, negate Q or, and negation, double negation, no? So, dito kay De Morgans, meron siyang double negation, no? Doon sa dalawang item. So, ginamit niya yung De Morgans. Okay, next. Doon sa double, okay, nag-double negation nga sa letter E, no? Okay, so from C, sorry, si De Morgan pala from C, meron siyang dalawang nakaseparate na, ayun, yun doon sa taas. Ayan, so ginamit niya yun, no? Okay. And then, doon sa, masyado mabilis yung utak ko, nabasa ko na agad yung double negation. Doon sa letter E, nakita niya, dalawang yung double negation dito, no? So, ito yung in-apply niya, double negation doon sa F, no? Negate Q and R. Ayan. Tapos, doon sa modus tollens, sa taas, nag-double negation siya ng Q, A and D, pinagsama niya si A at saka si D. Ayan. Okay. Therefore, pagdating dito sa R, sa H, disjunctive syllogism na siya. F and G. No? Ayan. Ito yung disjunctive syllogism. So, sa H, nag-arrive na siya sa tautology, which is yung R. Ayan. Okay. So, bago tayo mag-iwahiwalay for the break, ayan, babalikan lang natin ito. Ito yung ating next, yung ating pinaka-argument. And then, gagamit tayo ng yun yung karuktong nung doon sa, sa dulo. And then, gagawin natin tong exercise na to. Okay, so you may go for a break. Sorry. Ayan. May 2 minutes ako. Sino nga yung nagpapaalala? Nasa dulo. Sino yung nagpaalala sa akin? Si Mayben? Mayben, ikaw ba yung nagpaalala? Hindi.
Si Miss Hao po.
Okay. Ang balik natin ay 9:30. Correct? 9:30?
Correct po, madam.
Correct. Okay, so go for a break. So, yun yung ating gagawin na next. And then, meron tayong exercise. Alright. Go for a break and come back 9:30. Huwag mong butbutin yan. Huwag kang makulit. Balik. Okay. And then, maglalagay ako ng nag-login na ba ako? Nag-login na ako. Okay. Okay, music. Ito yung aking mga... Ano ba yung ating techie music? Ito na lang. Break na. Ginagawa mo dyan? Ba't nasa ilalim ka, ha? Ginagawa mo? Basic ko na ng tempo. Ano? Ika, uy. Patay na pagkain. Dali, baba. Baba. Ay, Diyos ko. Naku, umangat ka. Eh, paano ako ba aalis sa upuan ko? Okay. Okay. Ayan. Ayan. Nakikita mo na. Nakikita mo na lamesa ko. Ay, taas-taas ng lundag mo. Putay ako. Gusto ko lang ng ano. Ano ba yung tiyan mo? Masakit na ba yung tiyan mo? Masakit na ba yung tiyan ng bebe ko? Ayan, tuloy naiipit ka. Wala kang maaabot ako. Wala kang maaabot. Ano? Hindi mo ba ako maaalisin? Sumakay ka na dyan. Gusto mo yung posisyon na yan. Kumain ka ba? Kumain ka. Gumagalaw yung tiyan niya. Init na pala yung baruha ka. Gumagalaw ang tata.
Testimony about coups and crimes. And yet for some, a standout moment came yesterday when Republican Rusty Bowers recounted his resistance to Trump's illegal demands as a matter of faith.
It is a tenet of my faith that the Constitution is my instrument, my most basic foundation.
Now that's not a common refrain for investigative hearings, or for a lot of the Americans who have been outraged by the Trump administration's crime spree, its lack of ethics. In fact, American cities and democratic areas are increasingly secular places, which is something that Republican leaders used to just rail against. To take one example, it's well known that they turned religious warrior, Pat Buchanan, who back in the day quite literally warned of secular Americans oppressing religious Americans.
The agenda that Clinton and Clinton would impose on America. Abortion on demand, a litmus test for the Supreme Court, homosexual rights, discrimination against religious schools, women in combat units. Let's change all right. It's not the kind of change we can abide in a nation we still call God's country. There is a religious war going on.
Religious war. That argument was central to the Republican Party's alliance with religious conservatives after Clinton, the party, leaned into a religious pitch for George W. Bush and spent years appointing the very judges who now are really in a way doing the opposite of Buchanan's warning. It is a Bush appointee, Justice Alito, who led and wrote the draft opinion that overrules Roe v. Wade and supports strict abortion bans. That's the draft we've seen a ruling expected any week now after it was leaked in unusual circumstances. And that ruling going after women's rights is viewed as a capstone on a multi-decade religious quest to really, if we're being honest, make scripture and certain select religious texts the foundation of American law. So judges appointed in the past era come in and try to change the rules so big government regulates women's lives and rights as if this were a long bygone era. Now against that context, something else has also happened. Americans across the spectrum are actually more supportive of women's rights and choice. 79% supporting gender equality, most opposing overturning Roe, opposing the vision of these judges installed by politicians in bed with the religious right. And we have people moving away from politicized religion, taking cues even on the right from more secular leaders on the new right, like Tucker Carlson, who's really the most popular conservative on TV and does not push specifically Christian themes, focusing more on race, immigration, and class, or a right-wing warrior cited most frequently as potentially mixed up in the GOP. You know what I'm talking about. DeSantis. And he attacks big government and COVID rules, but quote, rarely discusses religion publicly. Now, several of those points and quotes and the attention here on this secular emphasis are drawn from a New York Times essay by a conservative writer tracing this shift that may be happening in plain sight. How today's Republican Party has begun its divorce from the religious right. It's a document that this Times piece suggests that ongoing conservative support for Trump reflects kind of a new normal, not some aberration. And 20 years ago, it might have been unthinkable that someone with Donald Trump's personal history, aggressively vulgar secular style, and obvious ignorance of Christianity could ever get the Republican nomination. Or everything else, it just couldn't get past the religious rights power for the more conservative voting base. Well, Trump got the nomination twice. Some of his top rivals, as mentioned, are not much more publicly religious than he is. Which is really saying something. You think about or cite. The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics. The Testament,
Baby ko!
I think it's just been incredible. The whole Bible is incredible. I guess he just got Sure. But church-going Republicans were not fooled by a lot of that. In the 2016 primary, over 60% of Republicans who go to church weekly chose any other candidate but Trump, who was, of course, the most famous candidate who went on to win. So that's right. 30% of church-going formula guiding their choices and priorities, then why does the left and right seem more polarized than ever? And why, big question, is the Supreme Court still on the precipice of making Scripture the law of the land to regulate and oppress women?
Done almost anything for Donald Trump. But in this case, he was asking you to what was going on in state capitals in this period in a coordinated way on this big elector issue. It was a thing that really was a kind of obscured and in the dark, so much more focused on so much as Washington, and rightly so in this case. But man, a lot of information yesterday about the extent and the forwardness of what went on this front. And George, yesterday, Fox News actually carried this hearing. Fox News host came out and talked about how compelling the evidence was against Donald Trump. And I think one of the reasons why this testimony is so strong is because so many people, as John said, that are testifying were on board the Trump train from the very beginning, and they waited until the very end until he asked them to violate the Constitution. And so when you have somebody testifying against Donald Trump who says it is the tenet of my faith that the Constitution is divinely inspired, my most basic foundational belief for me to do this is foreign to my very being. That's not a progressive from the Upper West Side. That's somebody in the heart of Magdalene who believes as Donald Trump believes and Trump has believed, but they won't cross the line into illegal actions. I think how compelling is that? Again, for Trump's own audience, it's incredibly compelling, and it highlights the inherent tension that has existed in Magaland for the last 6 years, which is you have some people who are very deeply value-driven people, deeply religious people who somehow fell into following along with Donald Trump, either projecting positive qualities on her or deceiving themselves. Here, this man recognized that what Donald Trump was asking him to do was outright fraud. And he was not going to accept that. He was not going to rationalize it. He was not going to be silent. He was not going to accede to it in any way, because fundamentally, it struck his core being, it struck his core morality. And I hope that this resonates with Republicans who profess that would go to church every week and tell their children to be honest and to tell the truth and to do the right thing. And that's not what Donald Trump is all about. He's the opposite. Speaking right now, the lead Democratic negotiator of the gun reform bill, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, has been working tirelessly on the gun safety legislation for a decade. And Senator, Donald Trump has a problem with religious people. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand that some of them actually try to live by and uphold the principles of their religions. Donald Trump has not had one religious moment, not a flash of religion in his adulthood. But since he entered Republican politics, he has been surrounded by religious people or people who publicly claim to be religious. Most of the publicly religious people around Donald Trump do not take seriously the words, "So help me God." Those are the words at the end of the oath of office that everyone working in the Congress takes, the same oath that everyone working in the White House takes. For 4 years, Donald Trump watched everyone around him in Washington, working with him, violate that oath to support and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. He watched Republican members of the House and Senate violate that oath repeatedly. He watched everyone working for him in the White House violate that oath in various ways. And so, imagine Donald Trump's shock getting 2 separate phone calls. Russell Bowers, the extreme conservative Speaker of the House in Arizona, told Donald Trump that he would not do anything illegal for him. Did you tell the president in that second call that you supported him, that you voted for him, but that you would
anything illegal for him? I did, sir. You had told President Trump you would not do anything illegal for him. I did, both times. January 6th happened because people like Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, and John Eastman and others were all too eager to do whatever Donald Trump pushing up these blood. Kind of like having Liberty Mutual. The customer of car insurance, you only pay for 2. Wow. They use a bike Rising Group, July 1st.
Hey, my name is Justin Williams, lead of Los Angeles Cycling Team, and I'm here to tell you about my all-time favorite joggers. I'm one of the Sunday joggers. Love them, like very classic joggers. Wear them for everything. Feel good, look good. I love showing up slightly extra comfortable. You cannot beat that. Being able to go to your closet, put something on, and like feel proud, is the best part. Dior is taking performance to the next level, and I'm along for the ride.
Why choose proven quality sleep from the Sleep Number 360 Smart Bed? Because it can gently raise your partner's head and help relieve snoring. It's better. And you get almost 30 minutes more restful sleep per night. And now the Queen Sleep Number 360 C2 Smart Bed is only $8.99. Only for a limited time.
Thanks for Azo here. I've been taking Azo Glass to control everything. It has clinically studied ingredients and naturally supports glass muscle strength. And I don't hate myself, so that's good. I want my leg. On here with Azo.
Finding the perfect project manager isn't easy, but at Upwork, we found him. He's an elevator between his color-coordinated sticky notes and the cutest box lunch we've ever seen. And you can find me right now on Upwork.com. When the world is your workforce, finding the perfect project manager, designer, developer, or whoever you may need tends to fall right into place. Find the top-rated talent and start today on Upwork.com. Thousands of years ago, even if you were sitting at the top, you really couldn't count on superpowers. It took centuries for office to evolve, but there were some major holes in the design. Then people were inspired to do away with office chairs completely. Yeah, that's didn't work. In 2020 came the breakthrough the world has been waiting for. The first ever XHMT heat and massage chair by X-Chair. X-Chair just made history's most comfortable work chair even better by integrating heat and massage into our dynamic variable lumbar supports. Waves of glorious massage that can wake up tired muscles. Yes, soothing heat that melts away daily tension. The all-new XHMT massage chair by X-Chair. The future feels good. Upgrade to the ultimate work chair with the one and only XHMT by X-Chair. Use the code on your screen and get $100 off, plus a free footrest. Do you have a life insurance policy you no longer need? Now you can sell your policy, even a term policy, for immediate cash payment. Call Coventry Direct to learn more.
We thought we had planned carefully for our retirement.
But we quickly realized we needed a way to supplement our income.
Our friends sold their policy to help pay for other bills. It got me thinking. Maybe selling our policy could help with our retirement.
I'm serious. So I did some research and called Coventry Direct. They explained life insurance is a valuable asset that can be sold.
We could sell all of our policy or keep part of it with no future payments. We sold our policy. Now we can relax and enjoy our retirement as we had planned.
If you have $100,000 or more of life
Let's see if everybody here na. Ang salamin ko. Una, huwag mong but-butin yan. Right. Okay. So everybody seems to be here na. Right. Okay, so balikan lang natin yung ating pinag-uusapan. Ano, masakit? Masakit ba yung tiyan mo? Mga ka na ba? Sadali na ba kita sabit? Ha? Ang aking aso ay hindi ko maintindihan kung ano nangyayari sa kanya. Okay, hindi. Cancel mo lang. Baba mo lang yan. Right. 38. Okay. So, like I said, ano nangyari? Bakit tumire-diretso to? True identities, independence, distributed. Hanggang ka lang. Then, i-compose na natin. And then, eto na yung argument. Okay. So, balik na tayo. Okay. 9:34. So, 38. Kanina, 40 plus na tayo, diba? Parang 41. Maybe pa-note lang nung attendance, ha? Para mamaya.
Okay ko ang noted po.
So, ayan, 39. Kasi kanina alam ko 41 eh. Okay. Now, katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, pinag-usapan na natin kung paano yung ating gagawin dito sa exercise. Idagdag lang natin yung ating paggamit ng table, no? Yung truth table, no? So, ito kasama. So, anong gagawin nyo mamaya? Itong ating exercise, yung 1 to 5, itong 1 to 5 na to ay meron kayong gagawin. Una, titingnan nyo kung anong rules ang nag-a-apply, whether yan ay rules of inference, ito, rules of inference, or yung propositional equivalence. Okay? So, itong 1 to 5 na to. So, i-identify nyo kung ano. Then, pagkatapos nyo i-identify, syempre, kailangan natin ng proof, no? So, gagamitin nyo yung truth table. And then, sasabihin nyo, in the end, kung valid ba yung argument, no? So, dito, yung sabi dito sa exercise, use the truth table to determine whether yung 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 symbolic form of the argument is true, no? Whether it is valid or fallacious, no? So, it's a fallacy, no? So, ito, no? Sasabihin nyo kung yan ay valid with the use of truth table, no? So, identify nyo kung anong mag-a-apply na rule, whether that's rule of inference or a propositional equivalence. Ayan. Tapos, ano na yan? Sabihin nyo kung yan by valid or fallacy. And, meron tayong truth table. So, yun ang laman ng inyong PowerPoint. Now, eto naman yung paano natin gagawin, no? Paano i-construct, no? Siyempre, i-deconstruct nyo para base dito sa ating deconstruction example, which is ito, no? Sorry, hindi yan. Ito, which ang correct ay naandito. Ito yung correct na example. Ayan. Kasi may mga ano tayo, no? So i-deconstruct natin. So, meron kayong deconstruction. meron kayong sasabihin nyo kung valid or what, ano yung nag-apply na rules ng inference or propositional equivalence. Ayan. And then, yung ating truth table. Okay, balik tayo dito sa paggamit ng truth table. Okay. Right. So, yung ating statement, okay, so kahit katulad dito, merong 1, 2, 3, no? So, may tatlong statement, no? So, yun yung ating pinaka-premise. Ayan. So, yun yung ating pinaka-argument. Now, titingnan nyo dun sa premise kung ano yung nag-a-apply na rules. Okay. Ilalagyan nyo ngayon ng base dun sa statement yung ating nakalagay na naman yung mga symbolic form. So, identify nyo. And then, i-check natin ngayon kung yan ay fallacious. No? So, kung fallacious yan or valid, sasabihin nyo. Then, you will come up with a truth table. Now, gamitin natin itong ating example. So, ang example natin dito ay ito yung ating premise. P implies Q. P and then therefore Q, no? So these are all true. Now ito yung nilagay niyang diniconstruct niya, no, na conditional statement. P nasa loob siya, no, implies Q, and P andun sa loob kasama, no, implies Q, no. So, para i-construct ito sa truth table, okay, so nandito yung ating P, Q, P implies Q, P implies Q, and P implies Q, and P implies Q, no? So, hiniwalay niya lang. So, here, umabot na siya dun sa tautology nung na-deconstruct niya hanggang dito, no? So, yung deconstructing, yung ating example, ito, no? Ayan. And, okay. Ayan. So, ito na yung truth, pinaka-truth, no? Ito na yung pinakadulo, no? Nung na-deconstruct natin, no? So, if the conditional statement in the final column is false in the first case, then the argument is invalid or fallacy. So, dito sa unang statement ng ating last, kung yan ay naging false, therefore, it is false. Now, ito ngayon ay, itong ating example ay true. Dahil, ito naman, ito ay true, no? So, hindi siya tautology, hindi ka aabot doon, no? Okay. So, yun yung ating gagawin. Teka. Ilalagay ko lang ito sa, unahin ko nang ilagay ito sa print screen para meron tayong tamang example. Ayan na natin, ilalagay ko. So, pwede nyo nang simulan yung inyong activity. Okay. Hindi lang. Control A, Control copy. Nasaan yung aking 1-4, 1-4. Okay. Ayan. And, yan yung ating gagamitin. And, itong ating ipiprint screen ko lang. Pwede ko na ito i-delete. Ayan. Okay. So, ito yung ating exercise. Doon sa inyong instruction manual that kung bukas na, pero kung hindi nyo pa nabubuksan, that is on page 26. Ilalagay ko na rin sa GC. And, pwede nyong gumamit ng PowerPoint or yun sa Canva to present your analysis, no? Doon sa ating activity. Okay, you may start doing it now. Again, anong kailangan nyo dyan? Kailangan nyong i-determine yung naka-symbolic form na yan, kung yan ba ay fallacious. So, maglalagay kayo ng solution. Ayan, nakalagay yung example natin dun sa taas. And then, ilalagay nyo yung truth table. Pag nailagay nyo na yung solution, then you may say whether, yung panghuli, whether it's a fallacy or it's a valid argument, no? So, pagka valid argument, na-achieve niya yung tautology. Okay? So, yun lang po. Okay, malinaw po ba yung instruction?
May question po ako, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, paano po yung number 4? Isang premise lang po siya. Wala po siyang conclusion din.
Number 4. Number 4. Ayan nga natin para makita ko ng maayos. Oo nga, no? Bakit walang premise yan? Okay. So, pwede nyong computein, tas lagyan nyo ng premise. Ito kasi pwede nyo naman lagyan ng premise eh. Sige. Pag nilagyan ko to ng premise, meron na akong sagot. Pag nilagyan ko to ng conclusion, meron na tayo may sagot. So, additional, lagyan nyo ng conclusion, no? Pwede kayong nakikita ko na yung sagot dito eh. So, therefore, nakita ko na yung premise. Nakita ko na yung conclusion. Hindi lang nila nilagay. Pero lagyan nyo ng based doon sa ating dalawa na inference, laws of inference, rules of inference, at saka yung propositional equivalence. Nakikita ko na yung sagot ng yung pinaka-conclusion dyan eh. Pero kayo na maglagay ng conclusion. So, gawin natin additional na points yon pang number 6, no? Pang number 6. Kasi hindi nila nilagyan eh. Bakit ba kasi hindi nila nilagyan? Ayan. Kasi dapat pala tinignan ko muna kanina. Anyway, ayan. Sige. Isama nyo yon pang number 6 yung conclusion, no? Nitong ng number 4. Ayan. So, iurong nyo na lang yung yung numbers. Bali, number 6 yung number 5. Ayan na naman. Hindi na naman sila naglagay ng tamang arrangement. Inabigay ko na. Hindi ako makapagbigay tuloy ngayon ng conclusion. Kasi pag ginawa ko yung conclusion, ibig sabihin, mag-a-arrive ako doon sa rules ng inference. Sorry class ha. Sige, gawin nyo na lang pang number 6 yung number 5. Number 5 yung conclusion niya. Number 4. Okay? Right. Teka, mag-a-unshare ako. Saan? Don't save. Unshare. Ayan, naka-unshare na. Okay, start working on it. Medyo siguro mahaba-haba yan kasi maraming instruction. Okay, mag-end tayo ng mga 10-15. Ayan. We can use 30 minutes. 30 minutes to finish that. Para meron tayong presentation dun sa kabilang kalahati nung 15 minutes. Meron pang question? Wala na. Sige, you're already working on it. Ikaw, ano bang nangyayari sa'yo, ha? Manganganak ka na ba? Hindi ka rito. Manganganak ka na ba? Ha? Ano ba yung nangyayari sa foot mo, ha? Kaya nga, saan ba lumalabas yan dito? Ano ba yung mga nilalabas mo na, may dugo-dugo, naku. Ano, manganganak ka na ba? Dadali na ba sa sa bed? Ha? Ha? Ito naman, ang baby ko naman eh. Ha? Baby ko. Baby ko. Baby ko. Siguro yun ang hiningi niya. Meron siyang option na hindi magpakita. Sakit ba ang tiyan? Sakit ba ang tiyan ng bebe ko? Oh. Dami kong pasyente ngayon. Ikaw at saka ang nanay. Nanay, masakit ang balakang. Sumakitin ang nanay doon sa taas. Ah, pareho kayong ano. Ano ka sa taas? Gusto mo? Akit ka doon, dali. Akit ka doon. Okay. Siguro maganda i-share ko lang yung kalagay sa Facebook. Kaya meron akong nakikita. I-edit ko na nga ito. Teka, nalalo.
Being able to go to your job and put something on, like, feel proud, is the best part. You already taking performance to the next level, and I'm along for the ride.
It's a mixed up world. You already work for something, but whether you really does for people, not just one of the customers in terms of the X-Chain continues to be which is why we've launched a new X-Chain. Formats to understand the order to this regulation. Express and gain sight to increase your effectiveness in working office. Three more first in second. Do it for
Down for 6.
and access 4 combinations of research.
6. Ay, ang laki. Dito naman.
For avocado, sustainability comes first. We can add organic mattresses, pillows, and bedding. Certified facilities and facilities.
Control A, control copy.
Discover the most trusted organic mattress today at avocadomattress.com. For the know-hows, for the early birds, for the next ones, and for tough
Ang laki naman. Ah. Kinabi ko. Dito sa ilalim. Try A, control copy. Ayan. Maayos na. Okay. Nice ko na. Yan.
MAGA midterms can install Trump, laid out a step-by-step doomsday hypothetical scenario. Republicans win statewide offices in key battleground states this year in 2022. Then they change state laws in 2023 to give legislatures control over presidential electors. This new group of billionaires for democracy is called Investing in the U.S. The Washington Post points out that they are one of the most aggressive groups of big dollar donors invested in pushing back against what they see as a Republican plan to essentially unknit the sweater of American democracy so that Republicans just choose the next president regardless of how Americans vote. Joining us now is Michael Shearer. He's national political reporter for the Washington Post who broke this story today. Mr. Shearer, thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Ray.
You wrote about a number of different donor groups and some of their priorities and what they're spending on today. I'm focused in on this bit of your reporting related to Reid Hoffman and his efforts because I feel like that doomsday scenario that he's describing to billionaire donors is a thing that a lot of people on the left and in the center and even sort of just not Trumpy Republicans have been talking about as an inevitability for the country ahead of 2024. It sounds like there is a lot of overlap between the elite donor conversation here and the kind of word on the street for people who care about politics. Do you get the sense that that's fair?
Yeah, and I think I was surprised reporting the story how broad that concern is among the donor community. I focused on Reid's organization for some reasons to start. But really, if you go through all the big donor groups on the Democratic side, and these are mostly groups that pool donations from nonprofits, so a lot of this is not recorded in the lists of political donations. Lots of organizations that don't have to report where they're giving their money. This theme that the 2022 elections, even the 2024 elections, has really become a dominant one. And so what you have is a narrowing and a shifting of where they're focusing their money. Instead of focusing just on the House map or just on the Senate map, which is typically what you do in a midterm election, they're focused narrowly on 5 or 7 states where there's governor's races, where there's some state Supreme Court races, Secretary of State races, and they're really trying to win in those places to basically prevent Republicans from getting trifecta control both the legislative houses and the governorship, so that they could change the laws either for voting, the rules of voting, or changing how electors are awarded.
And Michael, is there also effectively sort of a public education component to this too, beyond funding individual candidates or even ballot measures? I mean, the way that you said they spelled this out in the call, this step-by-step hypothetical nightmare scenario, Republicans win statewide offices in key battleground states this year. Next year, they change state laws to give legislatures control over presidential electors. And then in the next presidential election in 2024, those state legislatures declare votes from urban centers to be tainted, and they decide they will overrule the popular vote in their states by sending their own state electors to Washington. I mean, that prospect, if there's a public education component to that, sort of telling people that that's the plan that they are investing against, potentially has the impact of inoculating the public against that kind of a scheme.
I think that's true, and it's true with some constituencies. What's interesting is a lot of this money that will not go to spread that message. So, for instance, in Pennsylvania, there's a $6 million effort that's been announced, part of one of these funding groups' efforts to educate people about Doug Mastriano, the Republican gubernatorial candidate. Most of that advertising campaign, door-knocking campaign is going to be about issues like abortion, minimum wage, unions, other issues in democracy, because they have found through their research, these groups, that those are the issues that will move voters. And that's really what this is about, moving voters, getting voters to vote who can otherwise vote, persuading voters, or in the case of Reid Hoffman's group, dissuading Republicans from voting Republican. So I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of education around this, but in a lot of cases, it won't be the primary thing. I think a lot of voters who are getting messages from these groups won't know the underlying idea behind the money being spent, which is to try and protect the 2024 democratic process.
Except for the fact that you're letting the cat out of the bag with this excellent reporting, which has its own excellent public education component to it. Michael Shearer, national political reporter for the Washington Post. Sir, thank you for joining us. Well done.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.
So this is the Meta Portal Plus, a smart video calling device that makes working from home work. A 12-megapixel lens makes sure your presentation is crystal clear. And Smart Camera auto pans and zooms to keep you perfectly in frame. Oh, and it syncs with your calendar. Plus, with Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and WebEx, you'll never miss a meeting. And neither will she. Now that's a productive day. Meta Portal. Make working from home work for you.
Vision helps ease my mind. Kind of like having Liberty Mutual. They customize your car insurance, so you only pay for what you need. Whoa. Maybe it's a biker today. Indians, Rise of Gru, in theaters July 1st.
We hit the bike trails every weekend.
Shingles doesn't care.
I grow all my own vegetables.
Shingles doesn't care. You still got the best roof you've ever seen. Good for you, but Shingles doesn't care. Because 1 in 3 people will get shingles. You need protection. No matter how healthy you feel, your immune system declines as you age, increasing your risk of getting shingles. So what can protect you? Shingrix protects. You can protect yourself from shingles with a vaccine proven to be over 90% effective. Shingrix is a vaccine used to prevent shingles in adults 50 years and older. Shingrix does not protect everyone and is not for those with severe allergic reactions to its ingredients or to a previous dose. An increased risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome is observed after getting Shingrix. Fainting can also happen. The most common side effects are pain, redness and swelling at the injection site, muscle pain, tiredness, headache, shivering, fever, and upset stomach. Ask your pharmacist or doctor about Shingrix. Shingles doesn't care, but you should.
bsit Rio Grande is now officially certified fresh. It's a 10% positive triumph. Emma Thompson is electric in this career best performance. One more time, just before. Okay, good luck to you, Rio Grande. Make it on. Finding the perfect designer isn't easy. But at Upwork, we found her. She's in Austin, between a fresh bowl of matcha and a fresh batch of wireframes. And you can find her and millions of other talented pros right now on Upwork.com. Your dry eyes deserve better. New preservative-free Ivisia Dry Eye Drops. Made with hydrating polymers that form a protective matrix over your eyes. Moisturizing hyaluronic acid and revitalizing trehalose. Scientifically formulated to reduce dryness, discomfort, and strain. Ivisia. We see a better way. From the makers of the #1 doctor-prescribed dry eye brand in Europe. Introducing Flippy, the world's first AI vision assistant. Let the robots do the robotic. So people can do the people work. This is Sandra. She gets her financial advice from her mother. This is Tony, who gets his financial advice from his old college roommate. And this is what Frank used to say. He got smart about retirement at smartasset.com. They matched him with vetted fiduciary financial advisors to help turn his retirement priorities into a retirement reality. Everybody sure misses Frank. Smartasset.com. Take our free quiz and be matched with up to 3 vetted financial advisors. Get smart about retirement. Introducing Flippy, the world's first AI vision assistant.
Anong ginamit ko? Ginamit ko yung kabila.
There will be another hearing in the January 6th investigation tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow's hearing is going to focus on Trump's efforts to use the Justice Department as part of his plot to overthrow the government. This will be the final hearing before the committee picks up again, we think, in mid-July. So this will be the last one for a while. The hearing itself starts at 3 p.m. Eastern. Then tomorrow night, starting at 8 o'clock, we're going to have our primetime recap of what happened. I'll be here for that, along with a big busload of my colleagues. So I will see you then, 8 o'clock tomorrow night. Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. I'll be joining you at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. Rachel, so imagine it's the mid-1990s, and you are with your elementary school on a tour of Washington, D.C. and the Capitol. Because you're like 30-ish, right? 33-ish? Yeah. And so...
Okay, we're rounding to the nearest 30-ish.
You're in elementary school, not even, and in the 1990s, and you're walking through
one of the congressional office buildings, and you see over there, in kind of some low traffic area, but over there on a stone bench, there's the famous columnist and pundit Mark Shields. And he's sitting beside a guy in a t-shirt and jeans, who's actually me. And I am counting $10,000 in cash. What do you think, and who do you report it to?
I think, wow, they've got drug dealers on the East Coast here too, Mom. That's probably it.
It was a strange moment. It was a strange moment. It's all going to be explained at the end of the show. Why Mark Shields was with me when I was counting $10,000 in cash in a congressional office building.
Can I just ask you in advance, how big is $10,000 in cash?
It was hundreds, you know, so it was like, I'd never seen it before. And it was quite a stack, and you gotta count them, and, you know, I just picked them up. This is a hint. I just picked them up in the garage downstairs.
You got me, Lawrence. You got your hooks in me.
That's right, his hair was done.
You got your hooks in me.
Let me just say that Mark Shields took it completely in stride. Okay, just completely in stride. Just another day in the hell.
Wasn't there, in fact, an elementary school tour group who saw you and immediately summoned the nearest police officer?
No, but I did worry one might be around the corner, and it just wasn't going to make any sense.
I would have been that narky little kid. I totally would have been. Except I would have been 25.
Explanation coming later in this hour.
Thank you, Lawrence. Can't wait.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, the Texas cover is really collapsing tonight, thanks to the relentless reporting by two of our first guests tonight and the singular crusade mounted by one Texas state senator who simply will not give up. The attempt to cover up what happened inside Broad Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, when a mass murderer killed 19 children and 2 teachers is really falling apart. Republican Governor Greg Abbott, with the help of other Republican elected officials, including the local district attorney in Uvalde, seemed to be all working together to cover up what happened inside the school until after Election Day in November, when Greg Abbott is hoping to be reelected over his Democratic opponent, Beto O'Rourke. But the district attorney has been forced to admit that she is not actually investigating anything, even though she publicly requested that everyone remain absolutely silent about what happened in the school until she completed her work without ever explaining what her work is, since the crime committed in the school was murder and the murderer is dead. Now, the Texas officials have been forced to speak publicly this week. They are in open public conflict with each other, provoking one of them to say the gloves are off. Local Republican officials in Uvalde believe that state Republican officials are trying to lay all of the blame for the bad police work inside the school on the local police, while local officials in Uvalde are demanding more information about what the state police officers were doing inside and outside of the school. And what it all comes down to is the power of the AR-15, the high-powered semi-automatic rifle that made for warfare that an 18-year-old was able to legally buy and carry into that school to rip human bodies apart. The doctor who saw the bodies of some of the children said that some of them were decapitated by that weapon that held Texas police officers from state and local police forces at bay for over an hour. For over an hour, local Uvalde police and the small police force of the Uvalde School District, along with state police officers and some federal officers, failed to rush into that classroom for over an hour because they were afraid of that weapon. Yesterday, Stephen Craw, the head of the state police forces, said 3 minutes after the murderer entered the school, the police had enough equipment and weapons to try to save the children.
3 minutes after the subject entered the West Building, there was a sufficient number of armed officers wearing body armor to isolate, distract, and neutralize the subject. The only thing stopping the hallway of dedicated officers from room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander,
who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children. The officers had weapons, the children had none. The officers had body armor, the children had none. The officers had training, the subject had none. 1 hour, 14 minutes and 8 seconds. That's how long the children waited and the teachers waited in rooms 111 to be rescued. And while they waited, the on-scene commander waited for radio and rifles. And he waited for shields. And he waited for SWAT. Lastly, he waited for a key that was never needed.
They waited because the police were afraid of what an AR-15 could do to them.
Based on the 100 rounds that he shot in the short amount of time period, could he have done as much damage, I think, we don't know the logic answer, with a bat or a knife or a revolver? Could he have killed as many people? No.
The head of the state police forces is blaming the failure of all of the different police departments, all of them, on one person. The chief of the 5-person police force whose only job is to serve the Uvalde School District. Chief Pete Arredondo has refused to testify in public about what he did and did not do inside the school in his capacity as chief of the school police force. But in one interview with the Texas Tribune, he insisted that he spent much of the hour searching for a key to unlock the classroom door. That story was cracked by the New York Times last week in reporting that indicated no one ever checked that the door was locked. Yesterday, the head of the state police testified that the door was not locked. They have indeed proved that. Everyone
Responsible naman itong mga tao.
Pete Arredondo in Uvalde has been actively protecting him until today, when he was finally placed on administrative leave by the superintendent of the school board that employs Pete Arredondo. That should have happened the day after the mass murder, but it took the school board a month to do that because they had no intention of doing it. They were forced to do that because the cover-up was collapsed. Everyone on the city council was trying to protect Pete Arredondo until last night, when citizens forced the city council in a public meeting to reverse themselves. Pete Arredondo won a seat on the city council and has had every intention of continuing in his police chief job while also serving on the city council, but he has not been able to attend, or has chosen not to attend, any public meetings of the city council because they all occurred after the mass murder in the school that he did nothing to prevent and that he does not want to talk about. The city council and the mayor conspired to have a secret swearing in of Pete Arredondo as a city councilor the week after the mass murders in the school. The mayor and the city council were doing everything they possibly could to protect Pete Arredondo. And last night, they were going to grant Pete Arredondo a special leave of absence from his job as a city councilor so that he could then hold on to his job as a city councilor. Because the rule is you're not allowed to miss 3 meetings of the city council, which Pete Arredondo is on the verge of doing. And if they granted him a leave of absence, then he wouldn't be recorded as missing 3 meetings. Plan didn't work because Kim Hammond rose to speak to the city council.
You said we don't have the power to fire him. Let me give you a simple out. You can remove him because he's going to vacate his seat. So your agenda number 6 is a decision on whether or not to give him a leave of absence. Why the hell would you? Let him miss 3 meetings. He's my councilman. Let him miss 3. The investigation's going to come in and tell us all why and what we can do better. What you can do right now is not give him, if he requested it, a leave of absence. Don't give him an out. We don't want him. We want him out. You can do something right now, tonight, and not table whether you're going to decide to give him that leave of absence. I implore you, do not give him that leave of absence.
I've heard you guys, and this bothers me a whole lot. I have an idea when I came in here. I was going to do a very short grant leave of absence so that we had to vote on it over and over and over. So you guys wouldn't see him. But I don't need to talk a whole lot more. I make a motion we do not grant the leave of absence for Councilman Arredondo.
And that was the end of that part of the cover-up. The Republican mayor of Uvalde, who has been helping Pete Arredondo hold on to both of his jobs, and who called Beto O'Rourke a sick son of a bitch for questioning Governor Greg Abbott's press conference about the shooting that was full of falsehoods. That same mayor is now very angry at Governor Greg Abbott's people. He's very angry at the people in state government who Governor Abbott is relying on to blame local Uvalde officials.
The gloves are off. As we know it, we will share it. We are not going to hold back anymore. We kept quiet at the request because we thought we were doing a formal investigation and doing the right thing. But yet, they can go to Austin and have public deals and talk about it and different things and not share a damn thing with this city or anybody in this community. And that's wrong. That's totally wrong.
The mayor directly attacked the head of the state police force, Steve McGraw, who Governor Abbott inherited from a previous administration, but who Governor Abbott can fire right now.
What kind of farce do you have in Austin today? At least the House had the audacity to keep it in the closed-door session, and we had the bozo and the clown show at the Senate today with the McGraw and everybody praying out there and giving answers that they still don't have the facts to. They still don't have the truth to. And yet again, he didn't talk about any other agencies that were there, that weren't there. And also have an accountability to everybody that was there too. Colonel McGraw has an agenda, and it's not to present a full report on what happened and to give factual answers to the families of this community.
Leading off our coverage tonight, J. David Goodman, Houston Bureau Chief for the New York Times, and Tony Poletsky, investigative reporter for the Boston American Statesman. Tony, I have to say...
Okay. Tapos na ba? O kailangan nyo pa ng additional time? Oh.
Well, I don't think any of it...
Mag-react na.
Ma'am, pwede po assignment?
Nahihirapan po kami.
Sige, additional time. Tuloy nyo lang. Hanggang matapos.
Ma'am, pwede po yung additional time 1 week po. Charis.
Hindi pwede. Hindi pwede. Sige. Bibigyan ko kayo ng sample, no? I-share ko lang yung natapos dun sa kabila para hindi kayo masyadong mahirapan. Madagdagan yung ano nyo. Habang dinediretso nyo yan, ilalagay ko lang yung sample sa sa email ko pala yan binuksan. Teka lang ha. I-share ko dun sa screen. Pero, hindi not the same exercises. It's a different exercise. But it will help because you have a sample, no? Okay. Dali lang. Download ko lang yung Siyempre, gusto ko naman di kayo masyadong mahirapan, no? Alam nyo naman, loves na loves kayo ni Ma'am Payne. Teka. Okay. Ito ay sample nung gawa nung kabila. Nung kabilang class ko, pero ito ay CS. Ang ginamit nila yung unang exercise. Ito yung kasunod eh. So, ito yung ipapagawa ko sa kanila bukas. Ito ang ginagawa nyo ngayon. Pero ito, kompleto to. Okay. So, pwede ko na-download ko na. Leave. Upload. Pwede ba ako mag-upload? Pwede ako mag-upload ng PowerPoint dito, no? Kaya. Tingnan nga natin kung kaya.
Pwede po, ma'am.
Okay, downloads. Tapos papasadahan ko, no? Okay. Enter. Ayan. Okay, so ito yung gawa ni Nones. Nakashare pa naman ako, no? Ha? Walang pasok bukas? Ano bang araw bukas? Petsa bukas. 24 ng June. Bakit walang pasok bukas? Oy,
Manila Day po.
Colarina, anong meron bukas?
Manila Day po.
Ah, talaga? Manila Day? Manila Day? Oo nga, kasi Santa Mesa is Manila. Anyway, sige. Ito yung example, buksan ko lang para meron tayong additional na cancel. Ayan. So, itong nilagyan nila ng the same procedure sa inyo, ang ginamit nila ay ito, no? Itong exercise na ito. Yan yung pinagamitan nila, no? So, baka isipin nyo, yun yung sagot. No, hindi. Iba din, no? Ito naman, parehong process din, no? So, lagay ko dito. Okay. So, ayan. So, yung unang statement, ito na yung pinakadulo nung meron ng solution. And then, sinabi niya na valid. Tapos, okay, ito yung ating tautology. No? Nagsimula sa P, Q, and R. And then, P implies Q. And then, nung niya, sinabi niya ba dito kung ano yung in-apply? Hindi niya sinabi. Hindi niya sinabi. Nones, mali naman yung mo. Okay, ang kulang lamang dito ay, eto na nag-arrive na siya sa pinakadulo, sinabi niya valid, kaso hindi niya sinabi kung anong rules of inference. Ano ka rin tong batang to? Okay, so mamaya, bukas pala sasabihin ko sa kanya, kung walang pasok bukas, ibig sabihin, nag-post na ba? Nag-post na sa PUP site, di pa? Okay. So ito, magandang example, wala nga lang, hindi niya in-identify yung rules kung anong in-apply niya. Pero ito yung sample, no? Ito na yung pinakadulo. Ang kulang lang dito kung ano yung ginamit doon sa rules of inference or propositional equivalence. So, ayan yung sample. Ito, nag-arrive na siya sa pinakadulo, no? Ayan. So, nakita nyo itong pinakadulo na ito. Ito yan, no? Nakikita nyo ba yung aking mouse? Mousy. Ayan. Yung mousy. Kaya nag-arrive siya na valid kasi itong pinaka-last, which is ito. Yan yung sa solution na dire-diretso, hindi niya na ipinakita. Ayan, no? Okay. So, nilagay ko na yung sample. Okay. Pwede nyong ma-access. So, sige, tuloy nyo lang yan. Nasa GC, download nyo lang. Okay. So, balik tayo doon sa ating nakashare na activity. Okay. Right. I-research ko nga yung Manila Day na yan. Tingnan ko baka meron na nakalagay sa school. Okay, dito ako sa kabilang screen. Ogel. Ano nga bukas? 24. June 24.
A monster was attacking. Because with Nero,
Ano ngayon? Manila Day. Palace declare 24th non-working holiday, araw ng Maynila. Si Duterte pa rin ba ang nag-declare nito? Ayan. Oo nga, no? 3 hours ago. Oo nga, si Duterte pa rin ang nag-declare. Na 24 bukas, special non-working holiday in Manila mark a declaration of the executive. Sabihin walang klase bukas dahil tayo nasa Maynila. Baba mo nga yan. Okay. Wala ba tong parang parang yung banner na pwedeng i-share. Tingnan ko nga kung sa image, may image to. Teka, yung search. Video kasi to. Image. 2021 to. Yung ano? 2022. 2022.
Here, take a look. This meter showing triple zeros means our 5-stage filter did its job. And if
Puro to yun. Walang declaration na ano, latest. Sa balita lang. Sana merong ano. Pero pwede na siguro yun. Sana may banner. Okay. Tingnan ko nga kung meron ng sinabi sa ano. CCIS. Cut patayin. Load out. Kaya ito. Oh, kala ko masakit ang balakang mo. Bakit bababa ka pa?
That's nothing, no more. It's all gone. That's what's left of the stage. That's the rest of the stage. Pack it up. Call it a day. Oh, that truss is gone. Yeah, there's this light. Saw in the video. Oh, there we go. Got a check here. That's all boxed up. Send it back to Dallas so it can go out again.
Sometimes the moments that really matter most end up getting lost. That's why I made this app that makes it easy. Have your photo printed, framed, and shipped to your doorstep. So if you've got a special photo on your phone, install the free keepsake app. You would love a chance to frame.
Yung bang sakit na yan, eh pareho rin nun sa dati, kahapon? O mas masakit ngayon? Huwag ka na kasi bumaba, doon ka na lang muna sa taas. Ayaw mo naman, nakakainis ka. Dito tayo sa ano, itong Manila Bulletin. Oo nga, ito nga yan. Proclamation. Sige, ilagay natin dito. Pero tingnan ko muna. Upo ka muna dito na eh. Yan o. Parang manganganak na yan eh. Dinudugo yung ano, pepe. Huwag ka nang lumabas na eh. Lalabas ka ba? Ha? Ako muna dito.
Nandito pala yung gunting na yan eh.
O, hiniram ko nga eh. Sige, pwede.
Alis. Paano ba ako makakaalakad doon?
Masakit siguro ang tiyan nito na eh. Huy! Anahin yung tiyan mo. Lang. Hinahanap lang ako na ano. CCIS. Oo, yung kanya kasi umakyat siya dito sa akin kanina. Dito. Yung tiyan niya tumatapat din sa tiyan ko. Nararamdaman ko yung tiyan niya, ganun, gumagano, no? Tapos kanina may dugo doon. Hindi ko alam. May parang dugo na may lamad. Ano kaya? Naidalhin ko na kaya sa bed. Kasi baka lalong mas stress yan eh.
insurrection.
Wala akong nakalagay dito sa CCIS. Pero kung nakapronounce na, ang mga to, hindi marunong mag-advise. Ba't nag-a-advise kayo dito sa CCIS? Ano ba itong mga to? Laman lang pronouncement. Balikan ko itong districts na. Okay. Lampasok yung klase ko bukas.
Bakit?
Holiday sa Maynila. Araw ng Maynila.
Aray po, tres ka. Tignan mo naman, oh.
Oo nga, kasi nga masakit nga yung tiyan niya, kaya ganyan yan. Gusto niya ganunin mo yung tiyan niya. Oo. Sinasabi niya, samahan mo naman ako sa hirap ko. Masakit yung tiyan ko. Ang bigat-bigat.
Aray po, tres ka naman.
Ganyan lang, ganyan. Oo na. Lalabas na nga eh. Ilabas mo na kasi. Ayun oh, tigas-tigas oh. Hindi rin siya makakain. Baka kaya ayaw kumain dahil matigas na yung tiyan niya. Ano na, ilalabas na yan, ano? Ilang kaya yan? Okay.
Masakit ba ang tiyan mo?
Oo, masakit po ang tiyan ko. Opo. Ang bigat-bigat po kasi. Oo. Oo, tigas oh. Oo, tigas-tigas na ganyan ba nung buntis ka? Tigas yung tiyan. Anong iwan? Para ka namang hindi nagbuntis.
Ma'am, 10:30 na po.
10:30 na. 10:30 na! O, di ibig sabihin, free na kayo. Talaga hindi natin...
Ma'am, assignment na po ba yan, ma'am?
Ha? Eh, di assignment na.
Assignment na po.
Oo, assignment na. Okay, ilagay nga gawin na lang nating assignment. Next meeting natin, i-present, ano? Okay. O,
Correct
sige.
po, madam.
O, sige.
Thank you po.
Hindi nyo kasi pinalisan eh. Asan na ba yung iba? Sabihin nyo nga sa akin para maging valid yung ating desisyon. Wala na akong magagawa. Sino nakaabot hanggang at least number 4? Magtaas nga ng kamay. Aba, meron na si Sharwin. Isa lang, number 4. How about number 3? O, tanggalin nyo muna yung mga na yan. Ayan. So, yan yung mga nasa number 3. Okay, o, sige. So, next meeting na lang natin to ituloy. Twice a week tayo, O, once lang. Parang once lang tayo.
Once lang po.
Once lang. O, si next week na to. Okay. O, sige. Kita-kits tayo next week.
Thank you po, madam.
May klase ba kayo bukas? May klase kayo bukas?
Thank you po, ma'am. Wala po, Manila Day po.
Hindi. May klase kayo. Hindi yung... Alam kong walang klase bukas. Kung may klase kayo bukas. As in, subject.
Meron po, ma'am. Major po. Comprog.
Okay. So, computer programming. Okay. O, sige. Kita-kits tayo.
Bye-bye po, ma'am.
Okay. Bye-bye na.
Bye po, ma'am. Ingat po.
Yung attendance ha. Mayben. Yung attendance.
Okay po, ma'am.
Sige.
Thank you po.
Ipopost ko na lang yung natapos. Ay, wait lang pala. Sandali. Bago kayo magsilayas, kukunan ko kayo ng screenshot. Dali. Buksan nyo na yung
Ma'am.
mga... Oh, yes.
Next week na rin po ipapasa after mag-present.
Anong next week ipapasa tapos mag-present? Ano ibig sabihin?
Next week, ay mamaya pa ipapasa or next week po ipapresent, ma'am.
Hindi. O nga pala kasi every Thursday nga pala tayo dahil once a week. Galing ha. Di mahaba-haba talaga ang oras nyo. O sige, next week nyo na ipapasa at next week nyo na rin ipepresent. Sabi ko, inisip ko, o nga pala, once a week lang sila. Okay, o sige, screenshot. O, ngiti muna naman dyan. No? Ayan, o diba? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. And one more. Ayos yung nasa background mo. Ang hello ha. Ano ba yan? Totoo ba yung nasa background mo?
K-pop lang ba?
K-pop lang yan, ano? Okay. Alright. Thank you. Yun na. Sige. You may go. Nakuha ko na yung screenshot nyo. Yung attendance ko na lang ha. Yung UR 40. Parang 41 kanina. O, may Ben, pakinote yung ano ha. Pakibigay sa akin ha.
Apo, ma'am. Noted po.
Alright. Thank you. Sige, you may now go.
Thank you po, madam.
Thank you po, ma'am.
Ingat po, ingat po.
Thank you po.
Thank you.
Ingat din.
Thank you po.
Okay.